Welcome back. Today we're going to be learning about Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. These are the descendants of Abraham. We're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 21. So here we go, 21. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." Isaac, he is the one that was promised. Isaac means laughter. It's wonderful. It's a joyous occasion. So Isaac, remember, if you think back, Ishmael was the son that was born to Hagar, the maidservant, because Sarai and Abram got impatient for the promise. They had to wait a while after that. Abraham's 100 years old, and he finally has this baby. That's a long time to wait. Imagine how long you might have to wait for things after you pray, but don't give up. So they have this baby, Isaac. All right, so then this is a very interesting passage. It's from Genesis 22. Remember, Abraham now, has waited for this promise. He was 75 when he left Haran. That's when God said, "You're going to have a baby. You're going to have descendants." So now he's waited, 25 years for this baby. I mean, he's 100 and he just has a newborn baby. So then what happens? 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." What? I mean, okay, we've been waiting for how long to have this baby, and now God says, "I want you to sacrifice him, to kill him." Verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants, his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. I always think that is such a cool little part. Well, first of all, Abraham seems to be following the directions to go and kill his son, to sacrifice his son. But then Isaac's like, okay, I got the fire, got the wood. Where's the sacrifice? And notice how Abraham says this. You could understand it in 2 different ways. In verse 8, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So he's like, hey, my son, listen to what I just said. God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. Or he might be saying, God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, which is my son. I mean, it's like you said it. It's like it's true both ways. Anyway, so verse 9, 22 verse 9. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. "I'm ready." "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide," and to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." And then the promise is restated, like, yes, Abraham, you did it. This is all the things you're going to get. First of all, what an awkward trip down the mountain for Abraham and Isaac. It's like, Dad, were you really going to sacrifice me? Oh, no. It's like, well, it kind of looked like you were going to sacrifice me. No, I knew God would provide. But God, why did God do this? Well, there's been whole books written on that question. It's a hard one. It's hard to understand why God would ask somebody to sacrifice their son. And we would like to say, well, we know the story. It didn't really happen. But Abraham didn't know that. Why in the world was he willing to? Well, because he trusted God. I mean, at this point, he's 100 years old. He actually had a baby. And now he's like, well, if God can do that, I guess he can give me another one. You know, I don't know what was going through his mind. But the fact, what is this? If you're a Christian, if you know this story, what does this make you think of, though? Is there another story that we talk about a lot more where a father sacrifices his son? Really does this time? Yeah, God sacrifices Jesus, his only begotten son. He sacrifices him for us. This is like it sort of tells the story early. It's a type of that story that we'll hear later on. So now we get to learn about a couple other people. Jacob and Esau. So we're going to go to chapter 25. I mean, there's so many great things to learn about here. But we're going to focus on Jacob and Esau. You might have heard this story. I don't know if I'll be able to read the whole thing, but we're going to start at 25, verse 19. This is the account of Abraham's son, Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. So Esau, I imagine him as a big red hairy teddy bear, and Jacob is not. But Jacob was holding onto his heel like he was going to pull him back, which was sort of like undermining the older. Because see, in the Old Testament, the oldest child, the oldest son, got everything. And the youngest, or anyone after him, didn't get it at all. So Esau was the oldest, so everything was going to go to him. Like the whole inheritance, the whole farm was going to go to Esau, not much for Jacob. And that's going to matter a lot in the rest of the story. It says in verse 27, the boys grew up and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Dad loved Esau, Mom loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was called Edom, which means red. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." What is a birthright? Well, this is sort of like everything. like sell me your inheritance kind of a thing. Which seems like kind of a lot. But so what does Esau say? "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. I mean, part of me thinks that Esau's like, yeah, whatever. Sure, I'll give you everything. Like, as if that's going to matter. Like, I'll still get it all because I'm the oldest, But Jacob, why would he even bring this up? It's kind of weird. So, but the point is that Esau sort of didn't care. Like, he's like, sure, whatever. Sure, for some bread and some red bean stew or pea soup, I'll give up everything. That's why it says he despised his birthright. It just didn't seem to matter much to him. All right, so then we're going to jump to chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for his son Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah, that was his wife, was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." This is weird. Why is Isaac's wife, Rebekah, wanting to trick him, wanting to lie to him so that Jacob gets the blessing instead of Esau? That is just a weird family dynamic right there. Verse 11, Genesis 27, verse 11. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son, Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread that she had made. Why did she do that, right? The clothes so he'd smell like Esau, because people didn't take showers or baths much back then. Everybody kind of stunk and definitely had a particular scent that you would have known them by. Maybe not so great of a scent. And then goat skin around his neck. Now, was he that hairy? Did he actually feel like a goat? It appears so. Verse 18. Jacob went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." So obviously Isaac was a little doubtful. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau, who must feel like a goat." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he said. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him. Such an odd story, right? It's not just Rebekah, the mother's fault. Jacob lies like 2 or 3 times to trick his father, to cheat him. Doesn't seem very right. But Isaac is going to bless him. And the thing was with a blessing, it's not like he had multiple blessings. They thought of it as an arrow that shoots the target. So when he blesses, whoever he blesses, there's nothing left over. It's all gone. So he said, "The smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed." 28 now. "May God give you the heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down before you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." I'm not going to be able to read this whole story, but after Isaac finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. And then you can imagine what happened. And Esau was not very happy. There wasn't a blessing left over. In verse 39, his father Isaac answered Esau, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." So, this wasn't a very good thing. Do you think Esau was happy or not? No. He was angry, very, very angry at his brother Jacob, who had tricked him. Probably mad at his mom, too, because he probably found out about that. So, anyway, Jacob, runs away. That's what Rebecca tells him to do. Go and run away. But we're going to learn about we're going to find out more. But Jacob leaves, so that he doesn't get in trouble. We're going to learn now about Jacob's wife. Oops, I need to be backing up a little bit. My head is getting cut off here. So we're going to go to Genesis, 29. Genesis 29. We're going to start at verse 15. It says, "After Jacob had stayed with his uncle, Laban, for a whole month, Laban said to him, 'Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be.' Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful." I don't know what having weak eyes means, but I guess Rachel was more beautiful, at least to Jacob. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give you to her, or give her to you, than to some other man. Stay here with me." So, Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Isn't that romantic? Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah! Which seems very odd to me that he did not know he was having sex with the girl Leah. How is it that he did not notice that? I don't know. But it appears that that's what happened. So Leah was there instead of... How did that happen? So verse 25, when morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. That's just sad, really, because, Leah was unloved, and that's going to make a big difference. Leah, well, first of all, we have 2 wives and only 1 husband, which was common, but not acceptable nowadays, right? But seemingly acceptable back then. So Jacob was married to Leah and Rachel, but he loved Rachel, did not love Leah. So what happens? Verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren, which means Rachel couldn't have kids, but Leah could. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. And now this is going to happen. You can read ahead if you'd like. But what ends up happening is, in total, Jacob is going to have 12 sons between Leah, Rachel, and their 2 servants, okay? But Leah is going to have a ton of sons. Now, did they have daughters as well? Maybe. I'm not sure. But they have 12 sons because sons, they mattered more, okay? Sons were the most important. I know it doesn't seem fair. I know it doesn't seem right. I get it. But it is what happened. And we just need to realize that that's how things were. So sons were like this big blessing. It was wonderful. And Leah had a ton of sons. Rachel had Isaac have a baby with her servant. And Leah did the same thing. And then at the very end, Rachel had a couple of kids, Benjamin and Joseph, right? Pretty sure about that. I haven't read it myself for a while, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So Leah had most of the kids, but finally Rachel had a couple. All right. So so these 12 sons will become really important. These 12 sons the 12 sons of Jacob is going to make a huge difference. The number 12 in the Bible is going to become very important from this point on. They'll become the 12 tribes of Israel. We'll find out in a moment that Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. Also, when you think of the 12 disciples, they represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is kind of interesting, right? So then what happens in chapter 32, we're going to remember Esau, still angry at Jacob. So Esau chases after Jacob. And Jacob sort of sends people ahead of him. I'm not going to read this whole story. You can read it, 32. But he sends ahead, say, remember you're Jacob's brother. Don't be mad at him. Don't be mad at him. Don't be mad at him. Finally, Esau runs into Jacob. And what happens? Esau forgives Jacob. It's amazing. Really. Esau's a good guy, after all. But before that happens, Jacob is really nervous. Okay? And in verse 32 of Genesis 22, this is what happens. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." So Jacob meets Esau. Esau forgives. Israel means wrestles with God. Wrestles with God. So we got the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Israel. Jacob wrestles with God. And the Israelites, the people that are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are going to be considered people who are always in this wrestling match with God. They wrestle with God. The idea of how do we understand God's word, all this kind of thing. So now we're going to learn a little bit about Joseph. Joseph is an interesting guy. Chapter 37. There are lots of stories. I'd encourage you to read them if you have the time. Like Genesis 37 through 44 is really all of these stories. There's even a movie, probably several movies about Joseph. But we're going to learn just about the introduction here. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, those are the servants, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, that's Jacob, remember, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Favoritism. Where did we just hear about this? Wasn't the fact that Rebekah loved Jacob more than Esau? And now, you see, Jacob loves Joseph more than his other sons. That's awful. My kids have asked me, "Who's your favorite?" I don't have a favorite. I mean, I have sometimes a person I'd rather do something with than somebody else, but not my favorite, right? You don't have favorites. That's just a bad thing. God does not like favoritism. We find that out lots of times in the Bible. But so, of course, it's going to make his brothers angry. And the way that it says that he showed his favoritism is he brought this richly ornamented robe. Another translation says a robe with sleeves, which I guess was a big deal. There's a movie called, or it's a musical actually, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. This is the story it's referring to. Verse 5, Genesis 37, verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Joseph was sort of an annoying little brother, and kind of a jerk too. So what happens, we're getting close to our time, so unfortunately I can't read all of this, but the next part of this chapter, Joseph is sold by his brothers. They throw him down a well, but they don't want to kill him, so they sell him to the Pharaoh, or to the Egyptians, I guess. And what ends up happening is they lie, they dip his robe, his richly ornamented robe, in blood and take it back to his father to say that he's dead, that he died. So now his brothers are all lying to him. So what ends up happening, I mean, there's so many parts of the story. It's such an interesting story, but many of you might even know some of what goes on here. What happens is Joseph gets put in charge of the king's, it says in chapter 39, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." So Joseph gets put in charge of this person's house. But his wife wants to have an affair with Joseph, okay? And Joseph says no. But the wife accuses him of having an affair anyway, and so Joseph gets put in jail. Totally not fair. Sometimes though, God lets unfair things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people. This is a refrain throughout the Bible. So when he's in jail, in chapter 40, we hear there's a cupbearer and a cupbearer and a baker who's in jail as well to the king. And the king has this dream. Let me see if I can find where the dream is. Here, let's see. Let me look. Joseph interprets these dreams. Okay, chapter 41. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. All right, so nobody could figure out what this dream meant, except God allowed Joseph to understand it. And this is what Joseph said, that God helped him to interpret. It wasn't Joseph, it was God, he said. Said those 7 fat cows were like 7 really good years. The 7 heads of grain were 7 really good years. Lots of yield in their harvest. Lots of livestock were born. But then after that, there'd be 7 lean years, 7 years of famine. And it was going to be so bad that the famine was going to eat up all of the old stuff that had been so good. So the 7 years of famine were going to be so bad that it was going to take away all the blessings from the previous 7 years. So this made sense to the king, to the Pharaoh, I should say. And he said, "Joseph, you're in charge now." So Joseph says, well, while we have all this extra, we're going to save some so that we'll have enough to get us through those lean years. And that's what happens. But here's the deal. Jacob's other sons, his 11 other sons, Joseph's brothers, they need to get grain from Egypt because they don't have enough food to eat. So they go. And, you know, it's an interesting story in chapters like 42 through 44. His brothers come to get the grain, but then Joseph sort of tricks them and puts like I think it's a cup, like a fancy king's cup, in their stuff. And then they get caught with it in their bags, which is totally unfair, right? Like they're cheating, that they're robbing him. But in the end, Joseph admits who he is because they didn't recognize him at the time. He makes himself known, and here's what happens. In chapter 45, then Joseph could no longer control himself. Before all his attendants, he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Why were they scared? Because the last time they saw him, they had put him in a well, sold him into slavery, and pretended that he was dead. And what's going to happen now? Verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." Isn't this kind of cool? He's saying, you know, all the horrible things that happened to me, God had a plan in all of this, right? Let's see. It's pretty cool stuff. But there's one last part of this. Chapter 50. And it's going to start... So then Joseph's father, what's his name? Jacob. Jacob dies. And now they're afraid. His brothers are afraid again that Joseph is going to get angry at them because they thought maybe he's just not going to get back at us because of our dad, right? So we're now at chapter 50, verse 18. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." How would you have felt if all these horrible things happened to you? Would you have really been able to forgive and to say, nope, God had a plan, I guess? It's hard, but that's what Joseph did. That's what makes him a hero. He also, you know, did some bad things along the way. He wasn't a great little kid, right? Not a great brother, but he did some great things in the end. So I hope that you learned a little bit about Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, because we'll be talking about them a lot. They're the sons of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Joseph. Cool stories. I hope you were able to read some of those in your free time if you'd like to, because that's what the Bible's for, to read. So I pray that you have a blessed rest of your night, and we'll see you in the next video. See you later.